Noah was just the new kid in class, quiet and unnoticed, until his teacher made him the target of her cruel prejudice. What she didn't know was that her actions were being watched, and soon, her world would turn upside down. It was the first day of school at Riverwood Elementary, a large, modern building standing tall in the center of Pinewood City. Outside, the streets were filled with children wearing colorful clothes, hurrying into their various classrooms, while their parents waved from cars lined up along the road. Inside the school was Mrs. Gladys Shelton, one of the strictest teachers at the school. She was known for being strict, but there was something unfair about how she treated certain kids. This particular day, a new student joined her class, a quiet boy named Noah Kai. He sat at the back, trying not to draw any attention to himself. Noah had just moved to the city with his family. He was a bit smaller than the other boys, wearing a plain blue shirt, jeans, and sneakers. He looked quiet and nervous, but eager to make friends. Mrs. Shelton noticed Noah right away, but it wasn't in a friendly way. "Hey, you! The new kid in the back," she called out sharply, her voice cutting through the classroom. "Come up here and introduce yourself to everyone." Noah got up slowly, and his heart started beating. He didn't like being put in the spotlight, especially on his first day. As he walked up to the front, Mrs. Shelton stared at him with a hard look on her face, her lips pressed together tightly.
"What's your name?" Mrs. Shelton asked Noah in a harsh tone. "Noah," he replied quietly. "Speak up, little boy. You're not hiding in the back now," she snapped, her words sending a chill through the room. Some kids chuckled, but most just stayed quiet, sensing something was wrong. Noah's face turned red with embarrassment. He didn't understand why she was being so mean, but he didn't say anything. He went back to his seat, trying to focus on the lessons. But Mrs. Shelton wasn't done with him yet. Throughout the morning, she singled him out for every tiny thing. If he didn't raise his hand quickly enough, she would make a remark. If his handwriting wasn't neat, she would either give him a disappointed look or scold him. Noah wished he could disappear, but he stayed calm, determined to get through the day. What Mrs. Shelton didn't know, though, was that her actions were not going unnoticed. Someone was watching, and soon, things would catch up with her in ways she could never imagine. Weeks passed, and Noah became even more withdrawn in class. Mrs. Shelton's unkind treatment continued. She would ask him the toughest questions, give him extra work, and sometimes humiliate him in front of the whole class. But Noah never complained. He had been taught to be strong, and he had a secret that gave him the courage to keep going. You see, Noah was not just any student. His father, Mr. Wei Kai, was the principal of Riverwood Elementary. He had only recently taken up the position, and no one knew Noah was his son. The Kai family had decided to keep this a secret so that Noah could have a regular school experience, without any special treatment. But Mrs. Shelton's behavior was far from normal. Every afternoon after school, Noah would visit his dad's office, and they would talk about his day. Mr. Kai was proud of his son for being brave, but he noticed that something wasn't right.
Noah would talk about little things, like how Mrs. Shelton always seemed to pick on him or how she treated him differently from the other students. Mr. Kai listened carefully but didn't want to jump to conclusions too quickly. He hoped that Mrs. Shelton's attitude would improve over time. One day after school, Noah entered his dad's office, looking more upset than usual. "Dad, why does Mrs. Shelton dislike me so much?" he asked in a low voice. Mr. Kai, after hearing his son, felt very bad. This wasn't just strict teaching, it was something more. He knew his son was being targeted unfairly, and it made him both sad and angry. But he stayed calm, knowing that the right time would come to deal with the situation. "Hang in there, Noah," his father said softly. "She doesn't know who you are yet, but she'll find out soon enough." And Mrs. Shelton, unaware of the truth, would soon learn in a way she wouldn't forget. It was a chilly Thursday morning when things finally came to a head. Mrs. Shelton had been especially harsh with Noah that day, accusing him of not finishing his homework, even though he had. She called him to the front of the class and pointed at him with a sharp finger. "This is what happens when you don't try hard enough," she said, her voice full of anger. You'll never succeed if you keep this up." The classroom fell silent. Noah stood there, feeling humiliated once again. But something was different this time. As Mrs. Shelton turned to walk back to her desk, the door to the classroom opened, and in walked Principal Wei Kai. The students immediately sat up straight. Mrs. Shelton, however, froze in her tracks. "Mrs. Shelton," Mr. Kai said calmly, but his voice was firm. "Could I speak to you in my office, please?" Mrs. Shelton's face tightened in confusion. Why was the principal in her classroom? She nodded stiffly and followed him out, her heart racing. In the principal's office, the truth came out. Mr. Kai revealed that Noah was his son. Mrs. Shelton's face turned pale as she realized the mistake she had made. She had been treating the principal's child unfairly, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was how she had treated him differently just because of his background. "I'm very disappointed in you, Mrs. Shelton," Mr. Kai said quietly, shaking his head. "No student should ever be treated this way, in this school or anywhere else." The next day, Mrs. Shelton was no longer in the classroom. When Noah arrived at school, there was a new teacher who greeted him with a warm smile. The weight on Noah's shoulders was lifted, and for the first time, he felt like he could finally enjoy school. As for Mrs. Shelton, she learned the hard way that treating others poorly always comes back to you, no matter how hard you try to hide it. Thank you for watching till the end. I hope you enjoyed this story. If you did, don't hesitate to like the video and share it with your friends too. Subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell for more fascinating stories. Have a nice day.